There we are. Made it into another Tuesday. And we are live, Stuart.
You know what? I don't seem I don't know why this happens, but on Instagram, no matter how many times I click to go live, it just works sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. And of course, since we're going live, I don't get a chance to find out why. That is so bizarre. All right, well, I guess I may not get on Instagram today. Uh, so where are we at otherwise?
We have our
Click
trusted
here for
financial
details.
advisor, Jimmy Watson, is in the audience.
Is he?
Hello, Jim.
Okay.
You're live. We're set, Stuart. So go ahead. Let's go ahead and roll in through. A few people joined us.
All righty. Hang on. Give me 1 second. I just want to get on Instagram. Well, I'll put it on later. Okay. Welcome everyone. It's 1 minute and 21 seconds after 11 a.m. on Tuesday, and that means it's time for Sand to Soul. This is a program that we put on every Tuesday at 11 a.m. to talk about real estate in the South Bay, specifically Manhattan, Hermosa, Redondo, Torrance, PV, El Segundo, Hawthorne, all those areas, Torrance, of course. And we want to encourage you to participate as well, if you so desire, by asking a question in the comment section. And we'll be happy to address your question. We'll put it right here on the screen and show what we're doing. But today's topic, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Stuart Fournier, 25-year veteran of the South Bay real estate world, Los Angeles real estate world, actually. And it's my pleasure to introduce.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Bonholzer. I am known as your loan queen. I'm a mortgage broker with AMS Mortgage Services, and I've been in the mortgage industry 6 years, and I'm a formal paralegal of 12 years. So I combine my legal industry in combination with what I now know and very much love in the real estate game. And yeah, there are actually, what is it, 12 or 13 cities in the South Bay. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stuart. I know there's quite a big cluster here. From what I
Yeah,
know, it's either 12 or 13.
three, four. Yeah, there's three. Beach cities are three, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
beach cities in my nomenclature means Manhattan, Redondo, and
Yeah.
Hermosa, and in other parts of the city it means Malibu, Santa Monica, and Venice. So
Oh,
we get those
interesting.
confused. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
funny that way.
No, but people I
Uh,
think underestimate how big the South Bay is. There are a lot of little cities sprinkled in. Redondo Beach being the largest in terms of square footage, but there's quite a few other ones
right,
that
right,
we're a part of.
but.
So,
Yeah, incorporated cities as well. But today's topic
yeah.
is short-term rentals. We wanted to talk to you and discuss short-term rentals because there's a great deal of confusion and along the lines that we're just talking about, city to city. And so
Yeah.
we're going to do our best to straighten that out for you a little bit. But the first thing we're going to talk about today, and please chime in if you have any questions about this, because it is a very complicated and emotional subject lately for the last few years, about the responsibilities and whether short-term rentals is a good idea for you. If you have any experiences and you want to participate, please feel free. We'd love to hear some of your stories. But to start off with, I'm going to start off with what some of the responsibilities are when it comes to short-term rentals. And one of the primary responsibilities is knowing exactly what the specific laws are in your city. Uh,
Yeah.
each city, especially in the South Bay, because we're regulated by the Coastal Commission, and for those of you that don't know what the Coastal Commission is, it is a very powerful regulatory agency that has a lot to say, even surpassing city laws when it comes to coastal living. Now, that area in the South Bay, specifically Manhattan, Hermosa, Redondo, which is affected the most, is about 1,000 yards from the high tide line. In other words, up
Okay.
to make that a little more graphic, that's up to about Ardmore for those of you that are in Manhattan and Hermosa, and I don't know exactly where, probably Broadway in Redondo. Now, I won't go through every city's particular plight because it is true that Manhattan and Hermosa have had their own legal battles with the state and their own legal battles with the Coastal Commission. Manhattan being one of the cities that has actually gone to the actual Supreme Court. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Fighting
so
for their right to keep short-term rentals, because I bet that's a lot of, I mean, look at all those strand houses. A lot of them get rented out in the summertime in the height of the market. I mean, right now, basically. I mean, look at, if you walk around, you'll see how many properties are occupied by people who definitely don't live there full time. Right?
right,
That's
right.
how they get majority of their income.
Right. And we could actually spend hours talking about each city's particular situation. But the bottom line here is that you need to know what your city's particular situation is.
Where would one
It-
find that data? Where do you think, would they go to the city to that? Would they go to a real estate attorney? If somebody wants to rent out their property, and let's say hypothetically it's not in Manhattan Beach on the Strand, let's say maybe it's in Lomita, or maybe it's in a city that's typically not talked about on a daily basis, where would one go to find data on their specific neighborhood?
Well, obviously the cities themselves, and they would contact the building departments, the planning departments of those particular cities, because it's a great question. Because if you're going to call the just the the main line or the receptionist or whatever entity has the front line, they probably won't be up to date. Again, as I said,
Yep.
it's a very intricate thing per city. So Lomita would be
Hmm.
completely different from Manhattan or Hermosa because of the beach areas. As for example, in
Hmm.
Manhattan, the first question would be, can I, am I within the coastal uh, district, as opposed to what the rest of the city is,
Hmm.
regulated to. So it really depends on which city. And yes, the easiest way is just to call the planning department and ask. And I will say that it's an imperative thing that you do because the fines for what we call 30 days or less is pretty much the
Hmm.
benchmark. In other words, if you're going to rent your place for less than 30 days, it's considered a short-term rental. And so your
Hmm.
VBROs and your companies like that don't really care. I mean, they
Hmm.
pretend they give a good political front about caring, but the bottom line is you're the one that's going to get the fine. You, as the
Hmm. Hmm.
owner, will be fined, and these fines can be anywhere from 1,000 to $5,000 a night. Now, I will tell you,
Wow.
for example, in Redondo Beach, they're extremely strict. If somebody wants to correct me on this, but I believe
Mhm, mhm,
there is no short-term rentals in Redondo, and they will find you per night. And a lot of
mhm.
people have learned that the
How
hard
would they find
ways.
you? How would the authorities find you? Not fine you, but find you. Like, would the neighbors complain, or how else would I'm always curious. Like, if you are renting something out for a week, I mean, who finds out? I think it's the neighbors. It's the nosy neighbors, right? Or
Neighbors is number one. But
because I don't think they
uh,
have investigators on the street that go through and try to figure out who's doing short term rentals or not.
right. So renter the general public is number one. But believe it or not, there are companies out there that have sold software to the cities to find out who's being listed on VBRO and what their situation
Really?
is in terms of right. So that's, I think, what's happening in Hermosa. Hermosa definitely
Mhm.
has a hired company that provides them software, or they run the software themselves to find out what's going on with VBR. And one of the main reasons they do this is because they consider it lost tax income. In other
Mm.
words, with VBRO, you are obligated to pay the city as well for what's a hotel tax. I'm forgetting what the actual name of the tax is.
Mhm.
But the cities are concerned not only about the neighbors being upset, but they're also considering the fact that hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxable income is the city's being cheated by.
They
So
want
that's
they
their
want
second
their
motivator,
tax,
right?
that's for sure. Stuart,
and
how about
this
we get back to the basics and actually tell the people what is considered a short-term rental? At which point is it considered short-term versus long-term? Because I know that there's actually a very specific, in my opinion, cutoff in terms of how many days is considered long-term versus short-term. Can you elaborate on that?
It's real simple. It's less than 30 days. I don't believe there's any city that has used a different benchmark than less than 30 days. So if you're renting your house out for less than 30 days, it's considered a short-term rental, whether it's brought before the Coastal Commission or the city itself. So it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the basic rub for the cities and for you as an owner. The laws in California have not changed in terms of property possession. Now, I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving legal advice, but it's my understanding. Let me just give
Mm-hmm.
that uh, codified situation that once you have possession of a property, whether it's 1 hour or 10 years, you basically have the same property rights that
Mm-hmm.
that you as a renter are entitled to. And we all know in California, those laws are very complicated, number one. They're very protective of the
Mm-hmm.
consumer, who's the person that moves in. And so the struggle for most of the cities and the struggle for most of the owners, and let's talk specifically about the owner's responsibility. What happens is, as you said, Anastasia, when neighbors start to complain, it becomes a police issue. And when it becomes a police issue, and I'll give Manhattan Beach as an example, if you get called more than 3 times for a loud party in Manhattan Beach, you get a fine. And I don't know
Oh,
exactly what
well.
the fine is, but it's very substantial. So what ends up
Mm-hmm.
happening is that there's always this rub between the neighbors that rent out to people for less than 30 days. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it can be more than that, and they can still be disruptive. But those people that are in the house have the same rights, essentially, as far as I understand, as someone who is going to rent it for a year. So even
Mm-hmm.
though you've rented it out for a week or two a day, guess what? It doesn't matter. You cannot kick those people out because they're disruptive. They can be fined by the police, but that doesn't mean that the police can actually kick them out or anything like that. So again, when
Mm-hmm.
you take on the responsibility of being a short-term rental owner,
Host.
if you will,
Yeah.
you're actually taking the same responsibility as a landlord in the state of California, and that hasn't
Mm-hmm.
changed. And that's my particular soapbox. I believe that the introduction of this industry, which has been around for a while, but now is becoming more prevalent in the South Bay,
Mm-hmm.
needs a different set of regulations when it comes to the possession of a
Yeah, you're
house.
right. Because I mean, people are now putting ADUs and accessory dwelling units on their property, and they're doing them short-term rentals properties without understanding the laws and now basically the rights of the tenants as it pertains to them now living in that property. What if something goes wrong? What if they go in their property thinking they're only going to be there over the weekend and they stop paying you and they stay for the entire month? You now have to legally evict them just like you would any other tenant.
And we've seen extreme examples of that in the news in Hollywood. A lot of the news that you've seen in Hollywood, where they actually hire for a party over the weekend, turns into something much more significant because they do
Mm-hmm.
incredible amount of damage to the place. And
Oh
then all
yeah.
of a sudden, they don't want to move out of the place because they do have a strategic stronghold on not having to fix anything because they're living there for free. So it's a real nightmare that is not going to go away
Yeah.
anytime soon until the state takes it by the horns and gives more regulation in terms of short-term rentals, in my opinion. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion. But let's talk about investment for a second. Uh, you know, I don't know if there are specific programs for loans or anything like that.
There
Is there?
are.
And
Yeah,
right?
there
Okay,
are. Yeah, yeah, there are.
let's talk about
The
that.
most popular one is called DSCR. It's a debt service coverage ratio loan, and we have what debt covered coverage ratio loan means that the mortgage must match the rental collected. There's two types of rentals that can be collected. Is it a long term tenant or is it a short term tenant? if we're in a neighborhood where it's common for there to be short-term rentals. For instance, give you an example, Lake Havasu, a lot of people have short-term rentals there. The same thing with Joshua Tree, a lot of short-term rentals there. So in this case, with the DSCR, it's easier to get that 1-to-1 ratio, which means when there's a match between the mortgage and the rent collected, short-term rental versus a long-term rental. The same thing with Big Bear. These are the types of cities that are known for seasonal short-term rental type of rentals, and it's more common to have short-term rentals than long-term rentals in these types of properties. So the DSCR is the most common. We're not using one's personal income to qualify, and that's the most common way to get in the investment field if somebody does want to buy a home. And whether they own their primary or not, it can be a renter, and they could literally be living paycheck to paycheck and still qualify for a DSCR loan. And that's the advantage of these types of loans, is it's looking at the cash flow of the property. Does it make sense from a cash flow perspective? If it does, we don't care how much money the consumer makes. And that's the beauty of it. And this DSCR loan is something that's, again, very, very common in other states apart from California. California does have caveats like Big Bear, like Mammoth, like Palm Springs recently had a big, access to DSCR loans. Recently, just like the city of Redondo Beach pulled away from short-term rentals a little while ago, Palm Springs did the same during COVID. Now there's only one condo association that allows short-term rentals. Most of them have been restricted now to 30-day plus rentals. And so if somebody is interested in getting into a short-term rental type of investment, look into the DSCR loan, but also look, very, very important, just like Stuart mentioned, look into what is the city going to do about the short-term rentals? Because you don't want to potentially be in the Palm Springs market thinking you are allowed to do short-term rentals when the recent laws have changed everything. Now you can't do it anymore. So you can no longer assume, just like you wouldn't want to assume when you buy a property that you can build a second story without doing your adequate research. What if you can't? So just like with any investment, do the research.
So let me get into that a little bit more. Uh, what is the distinction for the loan? I think you mentioned it, but I just as a point of review,
Yeah.
what is the distinction for the loan people to decide whether or not it is a short-term rental versus just a regular property investment? In
It's
other
based
words,
on geographic. Yeah, the appraiser will actually indicate if that specific neighborhood is known for short-term rentals or not. And one can't make a neighborhood short-term rentals when
right,
no other short-term rentals exist. And that data is available. They would simply go to even Rentometer or MLS, and they're going to look to see, are the neighborhood, when they are looking at neighborhood comps, they're looking, are they long-term rents or short-term rents? It's an easily accessible public information, and the appraiser would have access to that, and that's what the lender then refers back to. The lender is going to look to see, when the appraiser goes out there to determine the value of the home, this specific loan, more importantly than not, the value is important, obviously, because it just has to line up closely to the purchase price. But
right,
this ratio 1-to-1 is essential. We do have no ratio products too, which means there are no considerations. We don't care how much the rent is being collected. As a result, though, the interest rate's higher. And perhaps there's a longer prepayment penalty, like maybe 5 years or something like that. So there are products that exist, but the cheapest way to get into it is, in my opinion, when it does match 1-to-1 or even higher than that.
right. So, and for those of you that are watching, uh, invest income investment in the South Base, particularly the beach cities, is not something that's going to happen. Positive cash flow. Let me use that term because that's a term that you
Yeah.
see on late night TV a lot. Everything's
Yeah, the
positive
rate of
cash flow.
return
But
month to
there,
month may not
right,
cash flow, but what we are looking for in California is that asset appreciating for somebody year over year. That's a
right,
main consideration when somebody looks at me and comes to me and says, Anastasia, this mortgage is going to cost 5,000, but I'm only able to capture 4,000. The
right,
renter is only going to give me 4,000 each month. Is this still a good investment? Well, it depends. Where is the neighborhood? What is the rate of return over the last 10, 20 years for that neighborhood? Are you keeping the property longer than 10 years? And then we analyze the numbers going projecting forward. If that property now is going to capture $80,000 a year in appreciated value, then yes, it does make sense, because I don't have to be a math wizard here, but 80,000 divided by 12 more than now covers that $1,000 perceived loss per month.
Right. And the reason I bring this up is that the bottom line is that it's virtually impossible to buy positive cash flow property in the South Bay. When you're buying property
Mhm.
in the South Bay, you could be anywhere from 5 to 20 years out and breaking even or getting a positive cash flow. So therein lies the distinction between why short-term rentals have become so popular, because there's
Mhm.
just a
Mhm.
different market whatsoever. So anyway, we're
Mhm.
at 20 minutes. We need to cut it off.
Yeah.
I've got a dozen more questions for you regarding this. Maybe we'll cover it again. But next week, I want to talk if about the difference between a buyer's market and a seller's market. And the reason I want to do that is that it's my impression, and Anastasia, let me know if you feel the same way, that we are, for all intents and purposes, pretty much in a traditional market right now. That is to say, we're not necessarily in a buyer or a seller's market. And so I want to educate the people, the folks out there, to sort of create that distinction. In many ways, the traditional market is the best market for everyone because there's a lot more sensibility and there's a lot more explanation for property value. But we'll
Mhm.
get into that next week. How's that sound?
Yeah. And it looks like we have one question that came in from Jim. How do short-term rentals affect the real estate values? Is there data on it? From a lender's perspective, it can have a positive impact or a negative impact, just like any other comp in the area. Well, we mainly look at what have the sales been in the neighborhood, and where is the house in relation to those comps. So sometimes we do have comparables. Sometimes it is a positive thing, and sometimes it's a negative thing. Because if we have too many short-term rentals, just like what happened in Joshua Tree, right now there's a lot of short-term rentals that are sitting vacant because there's not enough people going to Joshua Tree to try to recoup. There's not enough people wanting those, so that's somewhat of a depreciating asset at this point in time. A lot of people came in and really thought Joshua Tree is the next best thing since sliced bread, and now they've come to realize that if you have an influx of a lot of short-term rental investors coming in a short period of time, it saturates the market, and you no longer hold the value for that piece of real estate. That piece of real estate depreciates, and when everyone tries to unload that same piece of real estate at the same time, just like in the stock market, you wouldn't want to sell when it's at the lowest. You want to sell at the height of the market. Just the same thing with real estate, in my opinion,
Yeah.
right? From a financial
Uh,
perspective.
It's a fascinating microcosm in terms of a situation because there's nothing outside of Joshua Tree. It's kind of stuck there in the middle of an area that has a limited supply, obviously, a limited amount of resource if any, outside of the city itself. So yeah, it's a fascinating study as to how short-term rentals can have completely taken over an actual city.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
all right.
Anyways, hopefully that answered the question. So we're going to go ahead and see you next week. And until then, happy Tuesday. Happy Taco Tuesday. My name is Anastasia. I am your loan queen. We did have a huge dip in rates. And so if you need to kind of look to see, I've put now 3 people in refi positions just because it's been
Fantastic.
that good, saving people more than $500 a month. So if you want to check your numbers, feel free to reach out. I'm always available.
And it's a slow time for the market. It's usually in August, but guess what? If you're a buyer, now's the best time to actually be looking because people are asleep at the switch. We'll talk about that some
Yeah,
other time. Anyway,
for
bye bye,
sure.
everybody. We'll see you next time at 11 o'clock for Sand to Soul. Take care.
Bye.